Hello everyone, this is Daim Shabazz, and I want to take a few minutes just to discuss the ending that we saw in the game of Charles Troutman. He's a promising player out of Atlanta, Georgia, and he arrived at this position after his 39th move, d5. Now, as we can see, that pawn cannot be stopped. Black is blocked in by the white king from stopping the pawn, and even if that king were, say, on a1, that king would not be able to stop the pawn because it's outside that square that we know about in our elementary education of chess endings. So what black has to do here is figure out a way to deflect the king so that it can rush through its pawn majority on the king side. So what black did here was play c3, and the moves are rather forced here. So here you're trying to draw the king over. White has to reply in kind to stop the pawn, king e3. Now, this position is very critical because you already know you can't stop the pawn on d5. It's going to make a queen. But the question is, how can I push through my own majority, which would in fact be enough to secure the draw? Black has a couple of options here. Black can continue to push the c2 pawn, but that pawn will be captured by the king. It can also take the pawn on h2, which is in fact what happened in the game. But then there's another move it has that could actually hold the position together, despite the fact that white will queen first. So let's see what actually happened in the game. Black did play king takes h2, and also the g3 pawn is hanging, but black doesn't have time to capture that pawn, so it has to push through its majority. White continues on. Now black plays h4. This is another critical position because white is close to queening, but black is also trying to push through its majority. And of course, white wants to stop that and played a very human g takes h4. And you would think, okay, the response is immediate. You would recapture the pawn, right? Well, no, because if you play the move g4, you'll notice that the g pawn is now headed for g1. In these endings, tempos are extremely important. So white played g takes h4, and believe it or not, this throws away the win. Not to sully the victory of Troutman, but again, this is an instructive ending. So the way white could have secured the victory cleanly is to play d7, which again, the moves are rather forced here. You could either play c2, which would be followed by king d2, stopping the pawn, or you can play g takes h3 right away. The position transposes. So in this position, black plays g takes h3, queen, g2, queen d6, and it's going to try to build a staircase here. And as you'll see, it's able to do so in a nick of time and win the game. King h3, then you just take on b6. And if black queens the pawn on g1, queen just takes the pawn, trades queens, and rushes the a pawn down for another queen. If h3, then you simply just, or if h1, you simply go to queen h7, forcing the king in front of the pawn, and then you're able to start capturing pawns without worrying about black queening. But g takes h4 throws away the win. Black plays or played g4, d7, g3. Now white queens here and tries to build that staircase that I talked about earlier, g2, queen d6. Now black can still hold this position. King h1, queen d5. They repeat moves. And again, this is actually a draw. but it's in blitz, so it's very hard to calculate these very accurately. Queen A2. Now here black blunders. Instead of king H1, which would effectively draw the game, black played king H3 to get out of the pen. And immediately, white was able to find a winning continuation. Queen E6, king G3, king G8, and then mate follows. Now going back to this position, where black played on the next move king takes H2, he could have replied with F5. And what does that do? Again, you're trying to create a majority and you use the c-pawn as a diversion. D6, F4, GF4, GF4, king D3, of course it's forced, you can't take on F4 because the c-pawn runs, F3, D7, F2, D8 queen, F1 check, king C3. And as you can see, this is a position that black actually has the advantage because it'll win the H2 pawn, but white has an infinite amount of checks and the game would most likely end in a draw. So F5 was actually the move to play instead of the king takes H2. But again, these are very hard positions to calculate. But I thought it was very instructive to see this play out in the Blitz game, and hopefully you enjoyed the video and hopefully you learned something.